So the Persian service begins at 5 o'clock, and you're invited to come. The baptism will be around 6:30. They're going to do it at the end, toward the end. If you just want to come for that, it'll be interesting. I'm going to be here. I'm looking forward to watching someone else baptize or watching the baptism from the other side. So if you want to come, you're welcome to do that. The visitation. Not angels this time, but these two ladies who come and visit with one another. Mary visits Elizabeth because they need each other. In all of this, I really believe they need each other. You see, what we know is that there's 4 people that kind of know what's going on, right? There may be more, but we know there's 4 that have an idea that God is doing something, that God is stirring, God is moving in a different direction. There's Zechariah, whom the angel Gabriel told that his wife was going to bear a son, and he is to name him John, and he's going to prepare the way. But Zechariah can't talk about it. And we know that Joseph knows, not because of Luke. We borrow Matthew. Matthew tells us Joseph knows something is happening. He's on a need-to-know basis. He needed to know because of the way in which God was going about this thing. She wasn't going to be married yet. He needed to know it. So Zechariah knows. Joseph knows. Elizabeth knows. And Mary, they know. They know, but they more than know. They feel it. They can feel God doing something new. Every time they wake up and they get sick, nauseated in the morning, they feel God doing something new. Every time they put on an old dress and it's just a little too tight in the midsection, they feel God expanding, God creating, God doing something new. Every time their ankles swell, every time they devour their plate of food and go back for more because they have an enormous appetite because now they're eating for 2, they taste God is doing something new. And Elizabeth, when she calls out to Zechariah and he doesn't answer, he just shows up and she remembers he can't talk and she giggles and she laughs and she says, "You didn't believe him." And she hears it. God is doing something new. And Mary, when she forgets how great with child she is, and she turns and she knocks things off of the table, she hears the voice of the angel who says, "He will be the Son of the Most High." They don't just know it. They feel it. They see it. They taste it. God is doing something different. God is coming in the midst of them. And so they need to be together. They need to come together because no one has experienced this. Few people. Yeah, Elizabeth's case, yeah, there were some women who were barren and they had children, but 2 of these things happening, they needed each other. And think about Mary. Think about it. She's pregnant. She's not married yet. And she lives in a time and a place where they stone women who are pregnant before they're married. What did she face? What ridicule did she have to hide? There were some people knew, but did people believe those stories? And so she needed to go to Elizabeth. And I think there's something else. I think that in the two of these coming together, what we see in our scripture today and what we hear in their response is when they are together, they have this moment and this deeper understanding of what God is doing. When they meet for the first time, something amazing, something magnificent, something spiritual happens. Mary walks in and she just speaks a normal greeting. And all of a sudden, Elizabeth gets excited. She doesn't whisper. She doesn't speak. She cries out loud, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." She's filled with the Spirit, the text tells us. She says, "Why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For this very reason, when I heard your greeting, the child in my womb leapt for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord." As soon as Mary speaks, the child in Elizabeth's womb jumps. Here John is. He's not even born yet, and he's already preparing the way. He's already telling people who Jesus is, and Jesus is just being formed in the womb. There is something incredible happening, something special happening, and it's happening with these women. And they're together. And Elizabeth is shouting, and Mary is singing. That song, we call it the Magnificat. Why? Because she breaks out and says, "My soul magnifies the Lord." It's like a musical, in a sense. She's singing this response because God has stirred with the two of them coming together, and she sings, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on, all generations will call me blessed." He's looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. And here I think we see in Elizabeth's excitement and in Mary's song, they really begin to comprehend something. They begin to really taste and understand the magnificence of what God is doing. It is new. It is different. It is great. And why did God choose them? Because of the lowliness of who they were. God doesn't choose them because they are rich, not because they're powerful or famous or known. God chooses them because they're not. For he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud with the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he sent away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promises made to our ancestors Abraham and to their descendants forever. God is keeping God's promise that he made all the way back to Abraham, someone else who was chosen in a surprising way. And God is doing this amazing thing, not through the popular girls, not through the rich girls, not through the princesses, but the lowly, the forgotten, the unknown. This is how God works. Where are you looking for God in this Advent season? Where are you looking for Christ? Are you looking in the high places, in the rich places, with the people who have the most followers? Where are you looking? Is God there? God is working through the lowly. They are favored, yes. They are blessed, absolutely. But it's because they are nobodies. And God has chosen them. It's how God works. This isn't a surprise. This is how God has always worked. He chooses what seems to be foolish to the world to do his great and wonderful things. Rachel Held Evans, in her book Inspired, talks about this. I want to read a quote that she has. She speaks about this. And here's what she says. She says, "Remember how in the beginning God put everything in order and made the whole cosmos a temple? Remember how we are created in God's image as stewards, not slaves? Remember how Adam and Eve disobeyed, how Cain and Abel fought, how all of the people on earth grew so rebellious and cruel that God regretted creating the world in the first place. Remember how one family's faithfulness was enough to save them from the great flood? Remember how God promised an elderly Abraham his descendants would outnumber the stars. Remember how Sarah laughed? Remember how God chose a peopleless nomad, a second-born son, a stuttering runaway, Moses, a little shepherd boy, David, to create, liberate, and rule a nation. Remember how that nation is named for a man who limped from wrestling with God. Remember how God saw the suffering of the banished Hagar, and the unloved Leah, and the oppressed Hebrew slaves. Remember how Pharaoh's mighty army drowned in the sea. Remember the desert. Remember the manna. Remember the water from rock. Remember how it is our God who said, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." Remember how this God has been faithful and how God works his faithfulness through surprising people. God is doing something great. Not through those who are well known, and not because they deserve it, because God chooses. God chooses the lowly. They are just as surprised as anyone else. Mary and Elizabeth, they're just as shocked as anyone else that this has happened to them, and they can hardly believe it. And they know the glory belongs to God. They find it. They find God in what God is doing. The most unlikely place. Where are you looking for God this Advent season? Are you looking in the right places? Are you looking in the high places? Are you looking at the lowly. You know, Jesus, when he's fully formed and delivered, and when he grows and teaches, he shares the same stories. In fact, his parables we'll find often tell the same kind of story. How it's the lowly who are chosen. We really see it in Luke's gospel. Do you remember the parables of Luke's gospel? Do you remember the parable of the Good Samaritan? Who is it? Who is it that knows how to be a neighbor to those who are in need? Who is it? It wasn't the priest. It wasn't the Levite. It was the despised Samaritan, the one they hated. And which ones of the sons got to eat the fatted calf? You remember? Was it the one that stayed home, that always did what he was supposed to do, even if it was begrudgingly, but he did what he was supposed to do. He did what his father told him to do, and he always had his father's field. Did he get the fatted calf? No, it was the one who rebelled, the one who ran away, the one who blew all the money, but came to realize that he can't make it without his daddy. You remember the rich man and Lazarus? What's the rich man's name again? We never know. We don't know. We know that he wears purple cloth because he's rich. We know that he feasts scrumptiously day and night, and he's just piling the food in, and the scraps are just falling on the floor, and there is sick, poor Lazarus dying, who longs to eat the crumbs at the rich man's table. And does he know? The rich man can't see him. He's forgotten him. And they die. They both die. And Lazarus, the poor man, is sitting in the bosom of Abraham, the choice seat of heaven, and the rich man is burning in agony and torture. Who does God choose? The lowly, the forgotten, the unknown, the secondborn, the lastborn, the Samaritan, the outcast. And where now is he choosing these people? Who are the lowly that you see in the news? Who do you find out on the streets? Where are the lowly? Do you know? God chooses the lowly. Do we see them? Where are we looking for God this Advent season? Are we looking in the right place? Story this week came out on social media, at least that's where I found it, about Charles Barkley. Do you know who Charles Barkley is? Anybody know Charles Barkley? Charles Barkley is a famous NBA basketball player. He was famous for playing back in the 80s and 90s. Of course, he was in the shadow of Michael Jordan, which they all were at that time, still are today. But he's also known because he's a commentator for the NBA now, and even for March Madness, the college basketball tournament. And he's kind of funny. He jokes around. They make commercials where they're picking fun out of him all the time. When he was younger, he got in a little bit of trouble for a statement he made. He said, "I'm nobody's role model." He said, "I'm an athlete. The kids shouldn't look up to me." And that created a lot of discussion and a lot of pushback. But the story that came out this week didn't have anything to do with basketball, didn't have anything to do with his broadcasting or his quotes. It was the fact that someone discovered that he had made an unusual friend. He was close friends with a man named Lin Wang, who was a kitty litter scientist. I can't even say it. I never knew they had scientists for kitty litter. And you can probably guess by his name that he's Chinese. He's a nobody. And somehow he was friends with Barclay. What happened was they happened to meet each other in a hotel bar. They were the only two, and they both liked to talk, and they struck up a conversation that lasted hours. And then it turned into dinner, and then they were back talking. And they were both there a couple of days, and they kept meeting up and talking. And Barclay just loved being with Lynn. And so Barclay said, you know, when you leave, I'm going to give you my number. And if you're ever in Atlanta or LA, I want you to look me up. And if I'm there, we're going to hang out. And they did. They hung out a lot. They became good, close friends. So much so that when Charles Barkley's mother died, and at the funeral in this tiny little town of Alabama, in walks this Chinese dressed in a striped polo shirt tucked into khaki shorts. And he's at an African-American funeral in Alabama, and he doesn't belong. And people are going, who is this? And Barclay looks and said, oh, that's my friend Lynn. He showed up at his mother's funeral. And the family of Lynn just couldn't believe, they didn't believe that he was really friends with Barclay. It just didn't make any sense until they discovered. They discovered, and when his daughter talked to Barclay, she said, what did you like about my dad? Why did y'all get along so much? He said, he's a likable guy. And we had this one thing in common that we hit on at the beginning. We both believe that if we just worked hard enough, then our race wouldn't matter. And we both discovered that the harder we worked, it still didn't matter. Our race did matter. And we had that in common. He was likable. And then the daughter said, but what did you guys talk about? And he said, he liked to talk about you and your brother. And he started telling these things that only her father knew. And they discovered they were really friends. It happened when 6'6" big, because Barclay got big, showed up at this funeral for Lynn after he passed away from his battle with cancer. Just as out of place as Lynn was, Barclay's mother died. But then he got up to speak. And he shared all these stories that only he could know because he was a friend. A true friend. Someone said, this is Barclay's greatest moment. And I think they're right. I think this is his greatest story. Better than all the stuff he does in the NBA, better than the funny commercials, this, because he chose to be friends. He really pursued to be a friend of an unknown kitty litter scientist. And it made a difference in Barclay's life. Now, I'm not trying to say that Barclay's like God, but this is how God works. God chooses Abraham and Moses. God chooses Jacob, even Leah. He chooses David and Zechariah, Elizabeth and Mary. And the lowly is where God is found. Where is he today? Where are you looking for him today? If we're not careful, we might miss it. Just like the Magi almost missed it. You know, the Magi, the wise men, they get this revelation that a child is born, the King of the Jews, and they have a star to follow. And they follow the star, and they're going, knowing that they're going to find the place, and they just can't help themselves. They just can't help it. They have to go where they think the baby is. And where do they stop? But Herod's palace. The king. If God has done something big, if a child that is important is born, it must be in the king's palace. But Jesus is so far from Herod's palace, in a forgotten town named Bethlehem, not in even a home, but a stable. They almost missed it. They assumed that God was in the big when God chooses the lowly, the most lowly birth that could possibly happen. And how did he die? The most humiliating death. Lowly. And Herod, I think Herod is thought of by Mary when she says those words. He scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts, and he has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. You're going to look for God in the big things, in the popular things, in the magnificent, mighty things. It's not where God works. So where are you looking? Where are we looking? Elizabeth and Mary are just as surprised as everyone else that they were chosen. And perhaps that's the very reason they were chosen in the first place. God chooses the lowly. God's great, wonderful deeds to be done. Favored, yeah. Mary's favored. Blessed, of course she's blessed. But it's because she's lowly. In this Advent, where are you looking for God? Are we looking in the right place? Amen.